Often we'll play games that we've been anticipating for months or years, and other times we'll buy a game on sale to give it a chance. But how often do we pay full price for a game we know little about and whether it would be something we would enjoy? This is how I played A Plague Tale: Innocence. Taking a chance on a full price game that I was unsure of whether I would enjoy it or not. But then we come to this review, and these are my favourite types of reviews to create. Not only was A Plague Tale enjoyable, it was a fantastic game that was beautiful to look at, incredible to listen to, had a great story to experience, some interesting gameplay mechanics, and easily goes on my Game of the Year list. There are a few areas in which the game stumbles, but it isn't enough to dampen my enjoyment of the game or hinder it in becoming a highly recommended game to play in 2019. Where gamers are often fed the same recycled franchises over and over again, and new franchises which can be released too early and have several technical issues or ideas which aren't fully developed, A Plague Tale can be seen as a beacon of quality for other games to live up to, and Asobo Studio is an example to other developers. It isn't perfect, and there are several areas where improvements could have been made that would truly make it a masterpiece. But let's take a trip to 14th century France and discover what makes this game such a great surprise of the year. You take on the role of Amicia, a privileged young girl living with her parents and younger brother in 14th century France. Your brother Hugo has had some sort of sickness which you don't quite understand, but the life of your character and Hugo are turned upside down when the Inquisition visits the property. This is a very basic summary of what the game is about, and I don't want to give away anything that happens, even if it's things that happen very early on. It's better left experienced by yourself. Just know that the story of A Plague Tale slowly unfolds over its 10 to 15 hour playtime. New characters are introduced, new settings are visited, new information is learned, and players are introduced to the hundreds and hundreds of infected rats that roam the locations and burst up through the ground. All of these elements and more will make you want to keep playing until the very end, and it won't feel like a chore at all, as A Plague Tale is simply a joy to look at and to play. The game is a thing of beauty, with each location and character being incredibly detailed. Locations, both indoor and outdoors, offer a great level of detail that immerses you in the time period and perfectly conveys what is happening around you and the seriousness of the situation. Outdoor environments perfectly reflect the French countryside and towns, with streams, trees, and vegetation all being graphically impressive, and this is extended to all of the locations which players will visit throughout the story. The inside of houses are filled with many items, which makes them feel more lived in, but it's also interesting to view these places knowing that the occupants have probably since died from the plague or simply left. This just adds to the story, and we as players are noticing such things as our characters are as well. We also see much larger indoor environments later in the game that simply look stunning in both detail and grandeur, and even with only these elements, A Plague Tale is one of the best looking games out there. Then we have lighting, which looks and behaves fantastically, and which will be spoken of more soon. Character clothing and faces all look great, with the only real blemishes being some stiff animations from characters and the average lip syncing. We aren't talking Naughty Dog level facial motion capture here, but it gets the job done, and I still immensely enjoyed the game despite these issues. But then we come to perhaps the area of graphics that impressed me the most, and that's in the death and decay that you see that really shows the severity of the situation. You'll see hundreds of bodies and animals that have fallen victim to the plague, with huge bloodstains covering the ground, flies buzzing over the corpses, plus the rats surrounding it all. That all sounds pretty horrible, but it's all needed to make sure the story and its characters' problems hit home for the player. The game runs at a constant frame rate, and I had no performance problems with playing on the Xbox One X. I wouldn't expect these problems either, as environments are sizable without being enormous, and the number of enemies on screen aren't enough to really stress performance at all. I found texture quality overall to be very good, but since the game is played in the third person, there really aren't any times where you'll be close enough to the textures to notice the lack of detail. As they are, they look great, as do many other areas of the game. Voice acting for the characters overall is of a very high quality, with some being outstanding and delivered perfectly. I did find that some of the dialogue fell a little flat in certain scenes where I didn't get the emotional impact I was expecting, but then in others it was much better. I found a few similarities to The Last of Us, which I'll briefly discuss later, but I found the game overall didn't quite hit those heights of emotional impact in certain scenes. Sound effects were also good, whether they be the sounds Amicia's sling firing the projectiles, the sounds of footsteps on stone floors or through mud, plus the sounds of the rats. All serve their purpose, but it's the music that really impressed me. The soundtrack can be quite haunting at times, and the other orchestral pieces are simply fantastic to listen to. A Plague Tale really shows off how far games have come with music and how important it is to the overall feel of the game. Listening to how the developers implement it within certain scenes to raise tension or emotional impact, but also when there is a lack of it. A Plague Tale has some of the best music I've heard in a game in recent memory. So I've covered what the game looks and sounds like and its story and characters, but how does it play? Don't head into this game thinking it will be full of action, as A Plague Tale is all about sneaking around the environment silently, taking down enemies as you move and hide behind boxes and other objects, or being hidden in foliage, but the game doesn't give players more than a slingshot in order to take down these foes. But apart from simple rocks that can take out an enemy with a lock onto the head, A Plague Tale also introduces several items that can be fired from the slingshot, both to take out enemies but also to be used in the environment, such as lighting and extinguishing fires, taking out lanterns, or manipulating the swarms of rats to move where you need them to be. Should Amicia be spotted by the enemies, then they will advance and kill her, but players are able to dodge these attacks. Guards can be taken out silently with a particular item, and others are also helpful should you be on the verge of death. I'm not wanting to go into much detail about what these items are, as discovering them through the playtime was enjoyable. Players will come across swarms of rats many times throughout the game, but I found their appearance and making my way past them was always enjoyable instead of being an annoyance. The developers implement other ways to manipulate the rats' movements as well, and as the game moves along, they are used to other interesting ways to keep things fresh. Players will find certain items around the environment that they can fire from their slingshots, such as rocks, or pots can be thrown to make a noise to lure enemies, but the players will also be collecting materials to craft the different types of ammo, but also for upgrades. As the story unfolds, players will be introduced to the new types of ammo they can craft, and early in the game, players will gain access to a crafting table as well. It is here you'll be able to acquire upgrades, such as reducing the load time of the slingshot or making it more quiet, upgrading the pocket and ammo bags to hold more of each material or ammo, or reduce the noise when running or dodging, increasing the duration of certain effects, and more. As the difficulty of the game increases, it becomes even more important to make sure you scavenge as many items as you can, as crafting ammo and upgrades use the same materials, so you will need as much as you can find. Materials aren't too hard to find, as just like The Last of Us, they flash white, so they can easily be noticeable for anybody who has played the Naughty Dog classic especially. In several sections of the game, players will be tasked in moving through an environment with their allies, manipulating mechanisms, lighting bonfires in order to move the swarms of rats around so they can pass through. I found these sections of the game to be fairly enjoyable, even if they weren't anything too great, but even seeing the beautiful environments and the sheer number of rats on screen was impressive, and it broke up the game a little, so you weren't simply travelling to the next location at all times, and it fit in with the story, which I found only gets better and more interesting as the game progresses. Earlier in the review, I mentioned that A Plague Tale, whilst great, isn't perfect, so let's see what could be improved upon in a potential sequel. It only appears a handful of times throughout the game, But this is also a criticism of The Last of Us, but I wish developers would implement more interesting ways to get to higher places without resorting to moving some conveniently placed crate or cart to use. When a game has characters and a story that is serious and mature, these very game-like elements stick out even more. It doesn't ruin the segment or anything drastic, but it pulled me out of the world a little, which is otherwise so well made. Considering there aren't any real weapons in the game in terms of guns, if Amicia is spotted by the guards, then you'll need to run and hide and dodge their attacks as you ready your slingshot. In several areas, that trial and error made its appearance. Now, many games have this, so this isn't particular to a Plague Tale, but it does have a greater effect on the game than it does in, say, an action-oriented game. Replaying certain sections several times affects the impact that the scene is trying to have on the player. Important scenes, character-driven sections, or where important story elements are unfolding are negatively impacted each time you see them. These sections will eventually be passed once you know how the scene mostly plays out, but it does affect the emotional impact of what is happening and what you're being shown. My main complaint about the game, if I was being very harsh, would be that the relationship of the two main characters didn't quite hit the amazing heights I was hoping for. It's very good, and there are some touching moments during the story. I just wanted more of them, and this would have elevated the game even further. To draw a comparison to The Last of Us once again, both games are based around a character who is leading another whilst protecting them. But whereas The Last of Us has several pivotal and emotional scenes on top of the complicated relationship that exists between the characters, which has been building throughout the game and slowly unfolding, the relationship between Amicia and Hugo in A Plague Tale is much simpler and sometimes a little forced to move it forward. It still works, and as mentioned, there are some touching moments between the two. I just wanted more. For the most part, the swarms of rats are very impressive, but there were more than a handful of times when they would have erratic behaviour as if they were having a seizure, and this happened most often when I was manipulating light sources in the environment, especially when indoors. It wasn't enough to dampen my enjoyment at all, but it was there. With its beautiful graphics and sound and its intriguing story, A Plague Tale is a fantastic game that should be played by those who enjoy these style of games, or those wanting 10 to 15 hour story-driven experiences. I enjoyed my time immensely with this game, even though it does have several areas that could use improvement, especially taking the most emotional scenes and making sure that quality is extended to all others, and having the relationship between Hugo and Amicia made even stronger. But even with these issues, A Plague Tale was a great game. This was a title that wasn't on my radar at all, but I'm very happy to say that I enjoyed it so much and is easily one of my favourite games of the year. It may not be for everyone and it isn't perfect, but I highly recommend checking it out and experiencing this fantastic world and story.